There's a lot to unpack with this one, so I want you to just stay with me, okay? Hello everybody, welcome back to Meddling in Antiquity. My name is Teray, and today we're going to be talking about the 2015 AcornTV adaptation of Agatha Christie's And Then There Were None. So before we get into the history of the show itself, I want to kind of talk about the history of the book and the book's title, because it's been through a lot, to say the least. And it's a kind of a racist a lot. So let's kind of dig into the unfortunate history of this book's ever-revolving title. So, And Then There Were None was first published in the UK, which is where Agatha Christie is from, on November 6th, 1939, as something very racist based off of a minstrel song, because it was 1939 in the UK. Very unfortunate. However, to the surprise of probably a lot of people, it was released in the United States January of 1940 under the title And Then There Were None, which it kept that title except for a quite long period of time from 1964 to 1986, where it was released under the title 10 Little Indians alternatively. Because we have a problem. And it's very obvious. But to the surprise of what a lot of people think, it was never published under the initial UK title in the US, despite the fact that it was published in the US in 1940. However, the idea of publishing under the name 10 Little Indians is its own set of problems, considering they started doing it long after Dee Brown had already written Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, which was kind of the first look at Native American, at a Native perspective, an Indigenous people's perspective in regards to history. And that book was published in 1970, so for 16 years after the publishing of that book, there was a film, initial film version of And Then There Were None that was released as 10 Little Indians. I believe the stage show for And Then There Were None is also published under the name 10 Little Indians. I'm hoping that has changed at this point, because it should, because it's weird and offensive, considering that it is a story about murder. It is about people dying. So any title other than And Then There Were None is just really offensive to anybody who's involved in the particular group that is being named in the title. So now that I've gone over the very unfortunate history of the titling of the source material, let's get into breaking down the cast and the story. The story of And Then There Were None is about 10 people who are summoned to an island, all for different reasons. One thinks he's there for a party, one thinks he's there to be a doctor to someone, one thinks he's there to recover from an illness, one thinks she's there to get a donation for her charity, and so on. So they're all lured to this island under false pretenses. They're having dinner their first night on this island in the middle of the ocean, in the middle of the sea, essentially, and a record starts playing after dinner that is accusing them all of murder. So through the course of the rest of the story, each one of these people in the story starts dying, one by one, in the theme of a poem or song called 10 Little Soldier Boys. So and on the table in the dining room are 10 figures. Each time one of the people in the house dies, a figure is removed from the table, and it goes on and on until every single person in the house is dead. So, now that you have an idea of the plot, I'm gonna lay out our 10 Little Soldier Boys and give you who plays them and a couple things you might recognize them from. So going first, we have Anthony Marston, who is played by Douglas Booth, who, if you've seen Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, you have seen him as Mr. Bingley. Then we have Ethel Rogers, who I've talked about, whose actress I've talked about previously, because it is Anna Maxwell Martin, who people will have seen most recently as Beelzebub in Good Omens. Then we have General John MacArthur, played by Sam McNeill, who everyone will know from Jurassic Park. Thomas Rogers, who is played by Noah Taylor, and we will recognize him from the unfortunate 2005 version of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory as Mr. Bucket. Then we have Emily Brent, played by Miranda Richardson, who was also recently featured on the channel because she also played a character in Good Omens. Then we have Justice Lawrence Wargrave, who's played by Charles Dance, who many will recognize as Tywin Lannister from Game of Thrones. Then we have Dr. Edward Armstrong, who was played by Toby Stephens, who some may recognize as Captain Flint from Black Sails. Then Detective Sergeant William Blore, played by Bern Gorman, who people will recognize from both Torchwood and Pacific Rim. Then we have Philip Lombard, played by Aidan Turner, Keeley from The Hobbit, and Mitchell from Being Human UK. And then finally we have Vera Claythorne, played by Maeve Dermody, who if you've watched Miss Fisher's Murder Mysteries, you will recognize as Eunice Henderson from Season 1, Episode 2, Murder on the Ballarat Train. So now that I've given you the names of all of our soldier boys, let's kind of break down exactly what happens in the story and what crimes were committed and how, essentially, I'm going to equate who each character is to the line in the story. So we'll go through the poem and break it down stanza by stanza until there are none. Let's get into it. So I've got my computer in front of me because I find it easier to actually have the poem in front of me so I can read it off word for word as I go break down line by line. And there will be some spoilers. I'll try to do as little as possible, but I do just want to equate each character to who the poem actually exposes them as. And you will get a very good, obviously if you look at the poem beforehand, you'll get a very good idea of exactly how each person is going to die. So going in order, we have 10 little soldier boys went out to dine, one choked his little self, and then there were 9. That one who choked himself is Anthony Marston. And obviously he is the first to go, which is great because he is also the most annoying person in the entire house. And there's 9 little soldier boys sat up very late. One overslept himself, and then there were 8. Next, that is Mrs. Rogers, Ethel, who is a very interesting character because her and her husband were accused together. But watching the show, you kind of see that she doesn't really have any major part in the act itself or the act that they're accused of herself, other than keeping silent. But the longer you watch, the more you realize that her husband is a very angry, abusive man. So I feel that's why her death is the most peaceful, because it's nothing that happens is really any fault of hers, or anything that happens is not a fault of her own. Then we have 8 little soldier boys traveling in Devon. One said he'd stay there, and then there were 7. And that's where kind of everything picks up, because Devon is actually where they are. They are off the coast of Devon on an island called Soldier Island. And this 7th, the soldier boy, the 8th soldier boy is General MacArthur. And he is essentially going through the course of a full-scale mental breakdown due to his actions. He fought, because everything that's happening in this story takes place, I believe, in either 1937 or 1938. I believe it is 1938, but there's worries about going into World War II after having just come out of World War I. General MacArthur fought in World War I. And in that, it's a very, very interesting situation because he used that, his position and the fact that they were in battle, to hide his crime, which makes a very interesting kind of web of guilt that he feels him in, that he kind of builds for himself, because not only is there the issue of what he did, but there's also the guilt he feels because of what resulted from it and the loss of his wife. So he's a very complex character, but his death is extremely gruesome. Though certainly not as gruesome as what the next one we're going to get into. And that is 7 little soldier boys chopping up sticks. One chopped himself in half, and then there were 6. And this is where we really start to pick up speed, because at this point, everyone starts dying pretty rapid fire. And this soldier boy who chopped himself in half, that is Mr. Rogers. Which is very interesting when you see he very much has a dual nature, because he is a servant, but he is also very conniving. He's very almost slimy in a way that's just very distasteful. Every time he comes on screen, it's kind of like there's this aura of you don't want him to be there. And it gets worse after the death of his wife, because you see really the content of his character, because he essentially brushes on as though nothing is happening, which is horrible. And that's really all I'm going to say about it. Next, we have 6 little soldier boys playing with a hive, a bumblebee stung one, and then there were 5. So this 6th soldier boy is Miss Brent, a very, very strictly religious woman, and that is what essentially makes her guilty. She ran a boarding house for young women where she taught them grace and airs and essentially etiquette. One of those girls got pregnant out of wedlock, and Miss Brent refused to help her, threw her out, essentially making her homeless, so this girl jumped in front of a train. There's a lot of complications in that, because in the book and in the show, well, in the show it's more explicitly, you see it explicitly, but in the book it is implied that there is something altogether not quite as Christian as she would like about Miss Brent to begin with. And I will allow you to make of that what you will, because I am not going to tell you. You will just have to get yourself an AcornTV subscription and watch this yourself. Next, we have 5 little soldier boys going in for law. 1 got in chancery, and then there were 4. So this one is interesting, because here's where it gets a little bit complicated. So the next person on the list is Justice Wargrave. But there's not really much to say about it, because the last 4 deaths are the ones, well, the last 5 are really the most interesting, because this is where we start really narrowing it down, because there are only 5 people left in this house, and now there's only 4. And it's not like I can really explain it without spoiling the entire thing. But it's, let's just say Justice Wargrave's death, his murder, isn't really what we're seeing in this 5th section. Next, we have 4 little soldier boys going out to sea, a red herring swallowed 1, and then there were 3. So this 4th little soldier boy is Dr. Armstrong. So Dr. Armstrong is a recovering alcoholic. And as a former medical doctor, obviously you can see where there'd be some issues with that, because he would often come into work drunk. And as you know, people who are drunk do not have particularly dexterous motor skills. He was a surgeon. Make of that what you will. But the interesting thing is that they mark him as the red herring, and we'll get into that in the end as we kind of wrap up our last few soldier boys. Because after I wrap up the soldier boys, I want to talk about the crime scene itself when it's discovered. So now we'll get down to three little soldier boys walking in the zoo. A big bear hugged one, and then there were two. Our third soldier boy is DS Bloor. So Bloor was just a regular cop, and someone who he arrested was found murdered in his cell. It is heavily implied that the person who was murdered in their cell was arrested on crimes of public indecency, i.e., the polite way of saying they arrested him for being gay. He was murdered in a locked cell. The last person to see him alive was Bloor. Again, make of that what you will. But Bloor's punishment, I think, doesn't necessarily befit the crime. And that is actually where it differs from the books. In the book, his death is very different from what we see in the show. And I think it's very interesting that they changed that particular incident. But I mean, I think either of them could have worked. I just think that what they did was in the show was probably more cinematic, and it made a bit more sense. Then we have two little soldier boys sitting in the sun. One got all frizzled up, and then there was one. So if you paid attention to the cast, our last two people alive are Philip Lombard and Vera Claythorne. So Philip is the next to go. And Philip, of everyone there, he's kind of the Miss Scarlet of the group, if you want to compare, and then there were none to Clue. He's the Miss Scarlet. He owned up to what he is there for, what he's accused of immediately. Philip Lombard was a World War I soldier turned blood diamond hunter in Africa. He took a group out and they killed a tribe of 21 African people to obtain access to a diamond mine. He owned up to it immediately. And his line when he does so is either I'm exaggerating for effect, or I'm the only one telling the truth in a room full of liars, which is obviously very telling as to what is coming next. But Lombard is interesting, and it's very interesting to see the most timid character in the show, our final soldier boy, Vera, essentially, because she is kind of the central focus of the story. So what we have done so far in the show is watch her mental state steadily decline for the first part of the story, and then take a rapid dip downward as people start dying quicker and quicker and quicker. It's very interesting, and that was the purpose of the murderer, to see exactly how crazy he could drive this person. So our last line, one little soldier boy left all alone, he went and hanged himself, and then there were none. The purpose of everything happening in the story is to drive is to kill all of these people, but in the end, the murderer wanted to see if he could drive Vera just crazy enough to end her own life. And he succeeded, very obviously. So now that we've wrapped up everything, because I don't really want to give too much about Vera's the murder Vera is guilty of away, because it would really spoil a lot of why her character declines so quickly over these 5 days that they're on the island still alive. So now that I've gone over all of the murders, let's get into how they're found. Since in the show, they do not actually have a full resolution to exactly what happens. They don't show the police coming to the island and finding all of these bodies. They kind of leave it open-ended. However, in the books, we actually get a solid resolution, which is interesting. But what happened is in the books, in the books, they don't find Justice Wargrave where they initially thought where they put his dead body. I think so. It's a little interesting. So in the book, because this particular case is so complicated and so complex and there's so many different layers to it, and as the book ends, we end with Scotland Yard trying to figure out who is doing this. So what happens is they find Justice Wargrave's body sitting at the dining room table with a bullet hole through his forehead resembling the mark of Cain. That's not how he dies. At least not in any position that anyone who was left living in that house left him in. They certainly didn't prop him up at the dining room table and then leave a gun there. No. So, in order to kind of offset the confusion of exactly what happens, the killer in the book, because there is an entire epilogue portion with a letter written from the killer to the police that was found in a bottle floating off the coast of Devon by a fisherman who sent it into Scotland Yard. And in that letter, we slowly have clues revealed about who the killer is. And I'm not going to give it away because it is very surprising. And it's fun to read. And it's very interesting because the more, as you read it, as you read this epilogue, it's like the clues just pop out. And you have to kind of go through and look in the book and look back through the show and find like, there was a clue, there's a hint, there's a clue, there's a clue. And you start kind of having to go in and reevaluate exactly what you were looking at. And I think that's why this book is so masterfully written and why it is, in regards to Christie's writing, of the materials of hers that I've read, this one is probably my favorite. But that's kind of a summary of the story itself. And I guess let's get into final thoughts. And Then There Were None is interesting. It is Christie's 6th best-selling story, underneath the favorites of Poirot. I personally, having read Murder on the Orient Express, did not enjoy it nearly as much as I enjoyed And Then There Were None. However, Christie's writing obviously dramatically improved after her disappearance, for which still there are no answers. And we'll get into that probably in the next month or so, because I do plan on covering a speculative film that was released called Agatha and the Truth of Murder, which is a story that is a speculation of what could have happened to Christie during her extended disappearance. It is a very interesting film and I am very excited to cover it. But in regards to And Then There Were None, Obviously, the book has had a long history and an extremely racist history in regards to the titles that it has, the 2 alternate titles that it has been released under, both in the US and in the UK. But that doesn't change the fact that it is an incredible source material, and the 2015 adaptation is amazing. And if you can, I do really recommend purchasing the UK version, because for some unnecessary reason, the US release split it up into 3 episodes instead of the original 2 that were released in the UK. Watching the 2 episodes flows much better. But it is an incredible watch. I watched it when it aired, I believe, on PBS in 2015. I think that was in my senior year of high school, and I really enjoyed it. Having been a Game of Thrones fan and a Lord of the Rings fan for a long time, I was very excited to see Charles Dance and Aidan Turner in it. But it's very interesting. It is really cool to watch, and it is so much fun to kind of go through and pick out the clues that you can see and try and figure out and find all the things you missed the first time you watch it, because you do miss a lot of things the first time you go through and watch something that has so many layers, and it is such a complex mystery. I do recommend it. It is available on AcornTV. You can purchase a subscription separately. They are also available through Amazon. Don't watch it through Amazon. He does not need any more money. But I do really recommend it. It is a fascinating story, and in my opinion, it is probably one of Christie's best works. That wraps us up for Serial Scrutiny, and I will see everybody tomorrow for Socio-Political Smackdown. Bye.